No one saw it coming, at least not like this. On the night of 19th May 2025, Abidjan fell silent. Internet blackouts, power failure, gunshots in the north. People whispered of a coup of betrayal, of blood in the shadows. And then came the unthinkable. President Watara vanished without a trace. No speech, no army, just silence. But 800 kilometers away, in Ouagadougou, one man already knew something was wrong. Captain Ibrahim Traoré wasn't surprised. In fact, he was ready. Because in West Africa, power doesn't disappear, it gets moved. And some men know exactly when to act. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against global powers, if you believe that Africa deserves to write its own story in its own voice on its own terms, if you've ever seen that fire in the eyes of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, then this story is yours too. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to stand with us. Stand for sovereignty, stand for truth, because what began as whispers in the shadows is now a silent storm sweeping across the continent. And the question is no longer, will Africa rise? The question is, will you rise with it? But silence is never just silence. Not in a capital city, not when power vanishes overnight. As dawn approached, Abidjan remained paralyzed. Roads were empty, shops shuttered, soldiers stood at intersections without orders. Every screen showed the same thing, nothing. No press briefings, no military updates, only recycled clips of President Watara from weeks ago smiling as if time had frozen. But the people on the streets weren't fooled. They knew something had gone horribly wrong. In West Africa, when a president disappears, it's never by accident. The real shock, however, wasn't in Abidjan. It was in Ouagadougou, where Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood alone in his office, already fully briefed, before the world had even caught its breath. The lights were on at the presidential command center. Phones were ringing, orders were being drawn up. Traoré was not reacting, he was preparing. He didn't flinch when his advisors confirmed that Ouattara's convoy had vanished north of Yamoussoukro. He didn't panic when intelligence flagged unexplained aircraft movements near Korhogo. Instead, he asked just one question: who benefits from this chaos? Because to Traoré, this wasn't just a domestic coup, it was a signal. Someone somewhere had made their move, and they expected the rest of the continent to stay quiet. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré had never been one to watch from the sidelines. And so, as the rest of Africa speculated, hesitated, or stayed silent, Traoré leaned forward, narrowed his eyes, and whispered to his aide, "Find him, and find out who wants us next." While most of the continent remained frozen in uncertainty inside the presidential compound in Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré received a second report, this time hand-delivered by a senior intelligence officer. The document was marked "Classified Eyes Only." Inside was a detailed summary of intercepted communications, drone surveillance, and human intelligence from sources embedded deep inside Côte d'Ivoire's northern provinces. The conclusion was clear: this was no spontaneous uprising. Mercenaries had crossed the borders days before the chaos began. French-accented voices had been recorded issuing tactical orders in the outskirts of Korhogo. Satellite imagery revealed movement of military-grade vehicles with no Ivorian registration. Someone had planned this. But it wasn't the report that shook Traoré. It was the letter. It arrived not by official courier, but slipped under his office door. No envelope, no seal. Just a single creased page folded twice. Written in firm black ink were only 7 words. "If you stay silent, you'll be next." He stared at the words for a long moment. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the command monitors. His advisors, waiting for instruction, dared not speak. Traoré slowly folded the letter and placed it into his coat pocket without a word. Then he turned to the intelligence chief and said, "This isn't just an attack on Ouattara. It's a message for every African leader who thinks they're safe." For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, it was no longer about one man's disappearance. It was about a principle. A warning had been delivered to him directly and personally. Someone somewhere believed he could be intimidated. That silence could be bought. That Burkina Faso would look away. They were wrong. He picked up the red phone on his desk, the direct line to the Special Operations Division. "Prepare the unit," he said. "Tonight we move." The war room was filled with static. Maps of West Africa lit up across the digital table, dotted with red markers, border crossings, arms, caches, possible extraction points. But beneath the surface of this data, the real weight in the room wasn't strategic, it was moral. This was no ordinary military briefing, it was a decision point. Captain Ibrahim Traoré paced slowly, hands behind his back. He wasn't just calculating risk, he was calculating consequences. Intervening meant crossing borders, triggering diplomatic firestorms, and possibly stepping into a trap designed to bait Burkina Faso into war. But doing nothing, that meant accepting a future where African leaders could vanish and no one dared ask why. One of his closest aides, a former intelligence officer with a soft voice but sharp instincts, broke the silence. "Sir, we have no legal mandate. If this backfires, it's on you." Traore stopped walking. He turned, looked directly at the man, and answered plainly, "It's already on me. Every silence, every disappearance. It's on all of us." Another advisor warned him that France could use any intervention as justification to reassert military presence in the region. Others feared it was a false flag operation. What if Watara wasn't abducted but hiding? What if the letter was a setup? What if this was designed to discredit Traore, to portray him as a rogue actor? Doubt filled the room, and that was when Traore raised his voice, not in anger, but in conviction. "This isn't about Watara. This is about precedent. If we stay quiet today, they'll erase someone else tomorrow. And one day it will be Burkina Faso. And one day it will be me." The room fell silent. He pointed to the Korhogo sector on the map, then to a gray circle marked unknown signal source. "That's where the trail ends, and that's where we begin." In that moment, the debate ended. Orders were issued. Aircraft were fueled. The elite ghost team, Burkina Faso's most discreet special unit, was activated for a cross-border reconnaissance and recovery mission. No uniforms, no flags, just silent steel and a message Burkina Faso would not play dead. As the team prepared to move, Captain Ibrahim Traoré walked to the edge of the map table and rested both hands on the cold surface. His voice dropped low. "They wanted to scare us into inaction, but they made one mistake." He paused. "They assumed we were afraid." Night had fallen when the aircraft crossed into Ivorian airspace. No lights, no transponders. The mission was off the books, deniable by design. On board, the ghost team reviewed satellite photos, route maps, and a single image, an infrared still of a figure believed to be President Watara, seated in a dark room beneath a cocoa plantation near Korhogo. No one spoke. In operations like this, silence wasn't discipline, it was survival. On the ground, they moved quickly. Camouflaged by the forest and shielded by cloud cover, they advanced through the outer perimeter without resistance. The farm appeared abandoned, but the data didn't lie. Beneath the crumbling structure was something hidden, something guarded. At exactly 02:43 a.m., they located the underground hatch. It was locked, reinforced, and alarmed. But within 7 minutes, it was open. What they found inside changed the tone of the entire operation. The bunker was modern, too modern for a farm in rural Ivory Coast. Clean floors, fresh wiring, surveillance monitors showing live drone feeds, weapons crates stamped with serial codes, not matching Ivorian records, and on the walls, maps of the Sahel region, highlighting military bases, water routes, gold reserves. This wasn't a prison, it was a command post. Then they found him. Watara was tied to a steel chair, pale, dehydrated, but alive. His eyes were half open. At first, he didn't recognize the soldiers. He whispered something barely audible, and one operative leaned closer. What he said stunned them all. "Ibrahim," he knew this would happen. The soldier froze. He repeated the phrase to his team leader, unsure if it was a warning or a confession. Was Watara blaming Captain Ibrahim Traoré, or trusting him? They extracted the president quickly using a covert medical transport. But none of them could shake his words. The man they were rescuing believed Traore had foreseen this and possibly done nothing to stop it. Back in Ouagadougou, the message was relayed in real time. One of the aides read it aloud to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who was staring out the window at the city below. He didn't respond, he didn't flinch, he simply said, "He's alive, that's all that mattered, for now." And then he ordered the next phase of the plan into motion. Because for Traoré, finding Ouattara had never been the end game. It was only the beginning. 48 hours after the first shot was heard in Abidjan, the world finally got a response. But it didn't come from Côte d'Ivoire, it came from Ouagadougou. The press conference was announced with less than 1 hour's notice. International journalists scrambled to the capital. Cameras flashed. Microphones crowded the podium. At exactly 10:00 a.m., Captain Ibrahim Traoré walked into the room flanked by senior military officials. He wasn't smiling. He didn't wave. He simply stood there, calm, steady, impenetrable. He began without pleasantries. "We did not create this crisis," he said. "But we refuse to be silent while an African president is taken like a pawn and hidden beneath his own soil." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Traoré paused, letting the words settle. Then he continued, "We intervened for one reason, because no one else would." He outlined in stark terms the intelligence his government had received. He confirmed the existence of a foreign-built facility in Korhogo, the recovery of President Watara, and the absence of any official Ivorian or ECOWAS operation to rescue him. He stopped short of naming the forces behind it, but he didn't need to. The implication was clear. When a reporter from a major French outlet asked him directly whether he orchestrated the entire affair to dismantle France's influence in the region, Traore did not dodge. He looked straight at the camera and delivered a line that would echo across the continent. "The best director is the one who convinces you he's just an extra." That single sentence split opinion across the globe. Was it a denial cloaked in metaphor, or a confession wrapped in strategy? Some hailed him as the new face of African resistance, a man who acted when others stalled. Others called him a dangerous populist playing with regional fire, but none could ignore him. The conference ended without further explanation. No Q&A, no handshakes, just a final statement. Africa is not a playground, not anymore. Outside supporters chanted his name. Online videos of the speech went viral in minutes. Hashtags like Iron Traore and Africa stands echoed across timelines. But in European capitals, intelligence agencies scrambled to reassess their foothold in the Sahel. Meanwhile, back in Côte d'Ivoire, President Watara was quietly reinstated but visibly shaken. His public appearances were limited, his speeches carefully scripted. Many began to wonder, was he still in charge or merely restored? And through it all, Captain Ibrahim Traoré remained silent, because sometimes power doesn't shout. It simply acts and lets the world decide what it just witnessed. In the days that followed, the headlines faded, but the questions didn't. The world moved on, as it always does, but something had shifted beneath the surface. For the people of Côte d'Ivoire, the rescue of President Ouattara was not the end of the crisis. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Whispers of betrayal and complicity echoed across ministries. Some believed the president had been targeted by foreign powers. Others suspected he had staged his own disappearance to provoke international sympathy or to justify a clampdown. But one thing was undeniable: he had not been the one to reclaim his own seat. Someone else had moved the pieces, someone outside his borders, and that someone was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Across Africa, his name now carried weight far beyond Burkina Faso. To many, he was the man who dared to challenge the unwritten rules, the silent pacts between former colonies and their old masters. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't ask for applause. He simply acted, and in doing so exposed a truth no one wanted to speak, that Africa's sovereignty was still fragile, still conditional, still negotiable, unless someone decided it wasn't. But was Traoré the rescuer or the writer of the script? His silence only deepened the mystery. He gave no follow-up interviews, no memoirs, no self-congratulatory speeches, and yet across African cities from Dakar to Addis Ababa, his image appeared on murals, in chants, and in defiant songs. The younger generation, tired of excuses and hand-me-down democracies, saw in him something rare, a leader who did not flinch when history knocked on his door. But not everyone was celebrating. In Western embassies, the alarm bells had rung long before the press conference ended. Traore had defied diplomatic protocol, violated borders, and unmasked a covert operation no one had claimed. His methods, precise, surgical, unapologetic, left governments scrambling. If he could do this in Côte d'Ivoire, what would stop him from intervening elsewhere? What if this was just the first move in a regional strategy? What if the next president to disappear didn't come back? Intelligence analysts began drafting new profiles. Political risk reports were rewritten. Contracts were reviewed. And at the center of it all was one question no one could answer. What does Captain Ibrahim Traoré want? He had delivered a warning to the world, not through threats, but through action. And the silence that followed was more unsettling than any speech. It was the silence of a man who doesn't need to justify himself. A man who knows exactly what he's doing, and who's doing it not for applause, but for something far deeper. Perhaps power, yes, but not just that. Perhaps justice, perhaps revenge, or perhaps simply the restoration of African dignity on African terms. In the absence of certainty, the world was left with speculation. But the people on the streets of Ouagadougou didn't need theories. They had already made up their minds. To them, Traoré was not a suspect. He was a symbol that Africa no longer had to wait for approval, a symbol that fear could be turned into courage, a symbol that one voice backed by resolve could change the course of an entire region. And maybe that was the point all along. Maybe the story was never about President Watara. Maybe the abduction was never the climax, but merely the spark. Maybe this was the birth of a new doctrine, one in which African nations no longer begged for rescue, but became each other's protectors. And maybe, just maybe, that was why Captain Ibrahim Traoré said nothing in the end. Because the storm had already begun, and he was no longer speaking. He was listening to the footsteps of a continent that had finally started to move. If you believe that a small nation still has the courage to stand tall against global empires, if you believe that Africa deserves to write its own story with its own pen in its own voice, if you've ever seen the fire burning in the eyes of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, then this story belongs to you too. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to walk beside us through this rising storm of awakening, because the whispers have ended, and what follows now is the quiet roar of a continent remembering its power. The story of President Ouattara's disappearance and the unexpected intervention by Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just a tale of political maneuvers or military precision. It is more profoundly a mirror held up to the African continent and to every society grappling with the meaning of leadership, sovereignty, and courage in the face of silent domination. What this story teaches us first and foremost is that silence is never neutral. In geopolitics and diplomacy, even in daily governance, silence often means complicity. When Watara vanished, it wasn't just a national crisis, it was a regional test. A vacuum of power doesn't remain empty for long. In a region still shadowed by colonial influence and economic dependency, any disruption can quickly become an invitation for manipulation. But while others hesitated, calculated, or turned away, Captain Ibrahim Traoré chose to act. His decision was not only strategic, it was symbolic. It reminded us that African leadership doesn't have to follow scripts written abroad. It can and must be rewritten by those who know the true cost of foreign dependency, who have seen firsthand how deals made behind closed doors can unravel the dignity of entire nations. Traore didn't wait for approval. He didn't hold consultations with former metropoles. He trusted his instincts, his people, and a principle that African lives and leadership must be defended by Africans. From this, we learn that true leadership does not require the loudest voice. Sometimes it only needs quiet conviction and the courage to move when the world still debates. Traoré's calmness, his refusal to explain, to boast, or to seek validation, was not weakness. It was strength, the kind that unsettles traditional power structures. He didn't shout about justice, he delivered it. then stepped back to let the world interpret what had just happened. The operation in Korhogo also unveils a deeper lesson, that power is not always held in public offices. It is often hidden, quietly coordinated through unseen networks, multinational interests, and silent collaborators. The underground bunker, equipped with foreign surveillance tools and military-grade technology, was not just a holding cell. It was a symbol of how deeply Africa's affairs are still entangled in the agendas of others. Rescuing Ouattara was not only a humanitarian act, it was an exposure of uncomfortable truths, and in that moment the roles reversed. The supposed victim, the president, was reduced to whispers and uncertainty. The rescuer, the so-called outsider, became the center of gravity. This shift reminds us that titles alone do not define authority. Integrity, readiness, and decisive courage often speak louder than protocol. We also learn something about fear. The letter sent to Captain Traore, warning him that he would be next if he remained silent, was meant to intimidate. But it became the very trigger that propelled him forward. In this, we are reminded that fear, when met with resolve, becomes a weapon in the hands of the brave. Many would have retreated, sought shelter in neutrality. Traore walked directly into the storm, and in doing so turned a threat into a declaration of strength. From a continental perspective, this story sheds light on the role of unity and intra-African responsibility. For too long, African crises have been outsourced to foreign powers and peacekeeping missions that serve diplomatic interests more than justice. But what Traore demonstrated was a new form of pan-African accountability. He didn't wait for ECOWAS. He didn't lobby the United Nations. He acted as though Africa was capable of protecting itself, and in doing so he challenged others to raise their standards. There is also a moral lesson about legacy. Traore's actions weren't documented for glory. He gave no exclusive interviews. He didn't flood social media with heroic images. And yet his name became a symbol. That's because true legacy is not built in echo chambers. It is shaped by impact. It grows in silence and speaks through the changes it inspires. Traore understood this. He understood that history is written not just by victors, but by those who dare to act while others remain paralyzed. At the heart of this story is also the question of trust. When President Watara whispered Ibrahim knew, he wasn't just pointing fingers, he was raising doubt. Did Traore know more than he let on? Was he playing both sides? Or was he simply 10 steps ahead in a game most leaders don't even realize they're part of? This ambiguity forces us to reflect on how we judge our heroes. Must they be pure? Must they be transparent? Or is it enough that their actions tilt history in the right direction? Leadership in Africa and elsewhere is rarely black and white. Sometimes the man who breaks the rules does so not to destroy the system, but to expose the cage it has become. Ultimately, the greatest lesson from this story is about awakening. The whispers that filled the streets of Abidjan, the unmarked letter that found its way into Traore's office, the cold bunker beneath the cocoa fields, all of it points to something deeper than politics. It points to a continent remembering itself, remembering its strength, its pain, its unfinished revolution. And if this story reaches you, if you feel something stir, when you hear the name Captain Ibrahim Traore, then perhaps the lesson is not just to observe, but to participate. Because Africa's next chapter will not be written in silence. It will be written in footsteps, strong, steady, unafraid, moving together toward a future no one else can define for us. In a continent long divided by colonial borders, economic dependency, and political fragmentation, the idea that a young leader could speak for the collective conscience of Africa felt new and necessary. This was no longer about Burkina Faso. It was about a generation rising, about a continent ready to write its own narrative without waiting for permission. In classrooms, communities, and even in government corridors, this moment has sparked questions. What kind of leadership do we want? What is worth defending? What does sovereignty really mean in the 21st century? These questions, born from one act of honesty, may lead to something far bigger than one summit. They may lead to a new era where Africa is not defined by what others fear, but by what it dares to imagine. So the lesson is clear. Truth is not weakness. Patience is not inaction. Silence, when chosen wisely, can shake foundations. And when truth is spoken not for revenge, but for justice, it becomes unstoppable. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not just reveal a plot, he revealed a path. A path where African leadership is redefined not by power, but by purpose. Not by control, but by courage. Not by tradition, but by truth. And if this story teaches us anything, it is this: when one person chooses to stand, others will rise. When one moment pierces the darkness, others will follow. And when the truth is finally heard, no matter how late, no matter how small, it has the power to move an entire continent forward.